In international relations, a middle power is a sovereign state that is not a superpower or a great power, but still has large or moderate influence and international recognition. The concept of the middle power dates back to the origins of the European state system. In the late 16th century, Italian political thinker Giovanni Botero divided the world into three types of states: Grandissima, Mezzano, and Piccoli. According to Botero, a mezzano or middle power has sufficient strength and authority to stand on its own without the need of help from others. History and definition. No agreed standard method defines which states are middle powers. Some researchers use gross national product statistics to draw lists of middle powers around the world. Economically, middle powers are generally those that are not considered too big or too small, however that is defined. However, economics is not always the defining factor. Under the original sense of the term, a middle power was one that had some degree of influence globally, but did not dominate in any one area. However, this usage is not universal, and some define middle power to include nations that can be regarded as regional powers. According to academics at the University of Leicester and University of Nottingham, middle power status is usually identified in one of two ways. The traditional and most common way is to aggregate critical physical and material criteria to rank states according to their relative capabilities. Because countries' capabilities differ, they are categorized as superpowers, middle powers, or small powers. More recently, it is possible to discern a second method for identifying middle power status by focusing on behavioral attributes. This posits that middle powers can be distinguished from superpowers and smaller powers because of their foreign policy behavior. Middle powers carve out a niche for themselves by pursuing a narrow range and particular types of foreign policy interest. In this way, middle powers are countries that use their relative diplomatic skills in the service of international peace and stability. Both measures are contested and controversial, though the traditional quantitative method has proved more problematic than the behavioral method, according to Edward Jordan of Singapore Management University. All middle powers display foreign policy behavior that stabilizes and legitimizes the global order, typically through multilateral and cooperative initiatives. Constitutively, traditional middle powers are wealthy, stable, egalitarian, social democratic, and not regionally influential. Behaviorally, they exhibit a weak and ambivalent regional orientation, constructing identities distinct from powerful states in their regions and offer appeasing concessions to pressures for global reform. Emerging middle powers, by contrast, are semi-peripheral, materially inegalitarian and recently democratized states that demonstrate much regional influence and self-association. Behaviorally, they opt for reformist and not radical global change, exhibit a strong regional orientation favoring regional integration, but seek also to construct identities distinct from those of the weak states in their region. Another definition by the Middle Power Initiative. Middle power countries are politically and economically significant, internationally respected countries that have renounced the nuclear arms race, a standing that gives them significant international credibility. Under this definition, however, nuclear-armed states like India and Pakistan, and every state participant of the NATO nuclear sharing, would not be middle powers. Middle power diplomacy. According to Laura Neek of the International Studies Association, although there is some conceptual ambiguity surrounding the term middle power, middle powers are identified most often by their international behavior called middle power diplomacy, the tendency to pursue multilateral solutions to international problems, the tendency to embrace compromise positions in international disputes, and the tendency to embrace notions of good international citizenship to guide diplomacy. Middle powers are states who commit their relative affluence, managerial skills, and international prestige to the preservation of the international order and peace. Middle powers help to maintain the international order through coalition building. by serving as mediators and go-betweens, and through international conflict management and resolution activities, such as UN peacekeeping. Middle powers perform these internationalist activities because of an idealistic imperative they associate with being a middle power. The imperative is that the middle powers have a moral responsibility and collective ability to protect the international order from those who would threaten it, including, at times, the great or principal powers. This imperative was particularly profound during the most intense periods of the Cold War, according to international relations scholar Annette Baker-Fox. Relationships between middle powers and great powers reveal more intricate behaviors and bargaining schemes than has often been assumed. According to Sohei Yoshihide, middle power does not just mean a state's size or military or economic power. Rather, middle power diplomacy is defined by the issue area where a state invests its resources and knowledge. Middle power states avoid a direct confrontation with great powers, but they see themselves as moral actors and seek their own role in particular issue areas, such as human rights, environment, and arms regulations. Middle powers are the driving force in the process of transnational institutional building. Characteristics of middle power diplomacy include commitment to multilateralism through global institutions and allying with other middle powers, high degree of civil society penetration in the country's foreign policy, a country that reflects and forms its national identity through a novel foreign policy, peacekeeping, human security, the International Criminal Court, and the Kyoto Protocol. The Middle Powers Initiative, a program of the Global Security Institute, highlights the importance of middle powers diplomacy. Through MPI, 8 international non-governmental organizations are able to work primarily with middle power governments to encourage and educate the nuclear weapons states to take immediate practical steps that reduce nuclear dangers, and commence negotiations to eliminate nuclear weapons. Middle power countries are particularly influential in issues related to arms control, being that they are politically and economically significant. Internationally respected countries that have renounced the nuclear arms race, a standing that gives them significant political credibility. Self-defined by nation-states, the term first entered Canadian political discourse after World War II. Prime Minister Louis Street-Laurent, for example, called Canada a power of the middle rank, and helped to lay out the classical definition of Canadian middle power diplomacy. When he was advocating for Canada's election to the United Nations Security Council, he said that while the special nature of Canada's relationship to the United Kingdom and the United States complicates our responsibilities, Canada was not a satellite of either but would continue to make our decisions objectively, in the light of our obligations to our own people and their interest in the welfare of the international community. Canadian leaders believed Canada was a middle power because it was a junior partner in larger alliances, was actively involved in resolving disputes outside its own region, was not a former colonial power and therefore neutral in anti-colonial struggles, worked actively in the United Nations to represent the interests of smaller nations and to prevent the dominance of the superpowers, and because it was involved in humanitarian and peacekeeping efforts around the world. In March 2008, Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd defined his country's foreign policy as one of middle power diplomacy. Along the lines of similar criteria, Australia would influence international decision-makers on issues such as global economic, security and environmental challenges. Overlaps between great powers and middle powers. The overlaps between the lists of middle powers and great powers show that there is no unanimous agreement among authorities. Nations such as China, France, Russia and the United Kingdom are generally considered to be great powers due to their economic, military and strategic importance, their status as recognized nuclear powers and their permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council. Some academics also believe that Germany and Japan are great powers. but due to their large advanced economies and global influence is opposed to military and strategic capabilities. Yet sources have at times referred to these nations as middle powers too. France, Germany, Japan, Russia, United Kingdom. Some in the field of international relations, such as Professor Curtin and a Sciences Po academic, support the claim that Italy and Canada are great powers due to their status and membership in the G7. Moreover, according to a 2014 report by the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, Italy is listed among the great powers. Although broad academic support for India as a great power is uncommon, some in the field of political science, such as Malik Mohan and Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, consider India to be a great power too. Canada, India and Italy are also described as middle powers. Canada, India, Italy. List of middle powers. As with the great powers, there is no unanimous agreement among authorities as to which countries are considered middle powers. Lists are often the subject of much debate and tend to place comparatively large countries alongside relatively smaller nation-states. Clearly not all middle powers are of equal status. Some are considered regional powers and members of the G20, while others could very easily be considered small powers. Some larger middle powers also play important roles in the United Nations and other international organizations such as the WTO. The following is a list of countries that have been, at some point in time, considered middle powers by academics or other experts. Argentina, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Czech Republic, Denmark, Egypt, Finland, Greece, Hungary, Indonesia, Iran, Israel, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Mexico, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nigeria, Norway, Pakistan, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, Romania, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, Venezuela, Vietnam,